When I was 13 years old, my mother looked me in the eyes and said, "Today you're going to learn to respect your family." Then she opened that red notebook and read aloud my sins of the week. For 15 years, that notebook dictated the worst moments of my life until I discovered it could also be my salvation. Good morning, my dears. What a blessing to be able to talk with you today. I'm Martha Sullivan Jenkins, but everyone here in Cedar Springs, Michigan, knows me as Miss Martha. I'm 67 years old now, each year with its own story to tell, but today I'm here to share mine with you. I was born in Milfield, also in Michigan, but life brought me here almost 20 years ago. They say time flies when you're at peace, isn't that right? Today I live a quiet life, thank the Lord. Every morning I wake up early, even before the sun appears. It's a habit I never lost since childhood. I prepare my coffee, strong and sweet just how I like it, and tend to my plants. I have a small backyard, but it's full of medicinal herbs that I grow myself. Chamomile, mint, lavender, rosemary. Each one has its value and its secret. I learned about the power of plants from my grandmother Judith, and today I pass that knowledge to those who need it. 3 times a week, I go to the Cedar Springs Farmers Market to sell my tinctures and teas. I started almost by accident, you know. After my husband Harold passed away 8 years ago, I needed to find a way to support myself. At first, I just made remedies for neighbors who asked, "Miss Martha, do you have something for back pain?" "Miss Martha, my son has a fever, can you help?" And so it grew by word of mouth. Today I have loyal customers who come from far away just to get my preparations. I'm sitting here on my porch, watching the creek flow in the distance. It's a blessing to have this view every day. The house is simple, wood-painted light blue, with large windows to let the air circulate better in the Michigan summer heat. I have a rocking chair in the corner where I like to rest during hot afternoons. The walls are covered with photos of my 3 children and 5 grandchildren, who are the joy of my life. If you enjoyed getting to know me, please leave your like and subscribe to the channel. It's so important for me to know that my stories touch your hearts. And you, my dears who are watching me now, tell me in the comments which little town you're watching from and what time of day you found this video. Early morning with coffee, after lunch, or already in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take a moment from your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Tell me, okay? Let's create a circle of affection. Today, I want to share a story I've kept for many years. A story about strength, about survival, about how sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. You know, in my childhood we didn't have much, but we had a roof, food on the table, and at least in the beginning, I thought we had love. But there are things you only understand when you grow up, right? There are wounds that take time to heal, and some that we carry forever. In my house in Milfield, where I spent my childhood, there was an object that changed my life forever. A simple notebook. Seems like nothing, right? But that hardcover red notebook, with pages yellowed by time, was like a silent judge of my life. And look, for a long time I thought that notebook was my sentence. Only much later did I understand it could also be my liberation. But for you to understand all this, I need to go back to the very beginning. Back to the girl I was, growing up by the riverside with bare feet on the damp earth and a heart full of dreams that seemed as distant as the stars I saw every night before sleeping. That girl who didn't understand why the sky inside the house was always so heavy, so different from the open and free sky outside. I remember my childhood home as if it were yesterday. It was small, wooden too, but much simpler than where I live now. It was a bit removed from downtown Milfield, in an area where houses were scattered and everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did, because behind closed doors, many families kept secrets no one could imagine. I was born in a simple house in Milfield in 1958, daughter of Eleanor and Frank. My mother, Eleanor Jenkins, was a tall woman with posture as rigid as a fence post. Her hair was always tied in a tight bun, and she wore dark dresses down to her ankles, even in the suffocating heat of Michigan summers. She worked as a teacher in the only school in the area, and everyone respected her, or rather feared her. My father, Frank Sullivan, was a factory worker. He spent days at the plant and came home with his paycheck and breath smelling of whiskey. He was a man of few words and many silences. I had an older brother, Richard, who was 7 years older than me. From an early age, I learned he was the family's pride. "See how intelligent Richard is," my mother would say. "Observe how Richard helps his father," she repeated. Meanwhile, I was always the one who did everything wrong, the one who needed to improve, the one who was never good enough. Our house was simple but organized like a military barracks. Everything had its place, and heaven help anyone who moved anything. The wooden walls were bare, without decorations or pictures. There was only a large crucifix in the living room and a portrait of my parents on their wedding day. The floor was made of boards that creaked at the slightest movement, as if the house itself was always alert, always watching. We had 3 small bedrooms, one for my parents, one for Richard, and one for me. The kitchen was the only place that brought me some comfort, with the smell of pot roast with herbs that flavored our simple food. As a child, my routine was governed by the school bell and household chores. I woke before sunrise, helped light the wood stove, and prepared breakfast. Then I went to school where my mother taught. It was strange having your own mother as a teacher. At home, she criticized me for anything. At school, she pretended I didn't exist. Sometimes that was a relief. After school, I returned home and started my chores, washing clothes in the creek, cleaning the house, preparing dinner. Meanwhile, Richard could play with the other boys or help father when he was home. "Boys need to learn to work outside," my mother would say. "Girls need to learn to take care of the house." In the rare hours of free time, I liked to hide near the big oak tree in our backyard. There I played with my few rag dolls made by Mrs. Johnson, our neighbor who felt sorry for me. "Child, you need something to play with," she would say, contradicting my mother, who thought play was a waste of time. My best friend was Susan, daughter of Mr. Thompson, the general store owner. She was the same age as me, and we met at school and sometimes secretly by the creek. Together we invented stories, dreamed of distant places, laughed about secrets only girls understand. With Susan, I could be a real child, even if for a short time. During the 4th of July celebrations in Milfield, smaller than in the big cities but still important to us, the town came alive. The colors of the American flags and decorations filled the streets, and for a few days, even my house seemed less somber. My father always enjoyed the parade, and on these rare days, he smiled. It was as if for a moment we were a normal family, but there were signs from early on that something wasn't right in our home. I remember being about 8 when I noticed how my mother observed everything I did with hawk eyes. It wasn't a look of concern or care. It was a look of someone seeking flaws, expecting mistakes. It was around this time that I first saw the notebook. It was a late Sunday afternoon. Rain was hitting the roof hard, making that sound that normally calmed me. I was finishing washing the lunch dishes when I broke one of the few china plates we had, an inheritance from my paternal grandmother. The sound of the plate shattering on the floor was followed by a terrifying silence. I saw my mother rise from her rocking chair, where she was reading the Bible, go to the bedroom and return with a red notebook in her hands. She sat at the kitchen table, opened the notebook with almost religious care, and began to write, the pencil point piercing the paper with the force of her anger. "What are you writing, Mom?" I asked with a trembling voice. "I'm noting your faults, Martha," she replied, without raising her eyes. "God sees everything, but I help him remember." That night, I was sent to bed without dinner, the punishment for the broken plate. But something told me that the notation in the red notebook meant more than just a record. It was a promise of something worse to come. That's how my childhood was in Milfield, between the fear inside the house and the rare moments of joy outside it. I still didn't fully understand what was happening in our family. Children have that gift, don't they? To normalize the absurd, to accept as natural what is, in fact, deeply wrong. Only later did I understand that the red notebook was much more than a simple object. It was the beginning of a nightmare that would last for years. The real nightmare began when I turned 13 in 1971. I remember that day with a clarity that haunts me to this day. It was a Saturday and my mother had baked an apple pie. Not as a celebration, but because the pastor would visit us on Sunday. By that time, I was already changing, my body transforming from girl to young woman, something that left me confused and embarrassed. During dinner, my father looked at me differently, a look that made my stomach turn. Richard, then 20, had just returned from Detroit, where he had started working at an automobile factory. He had that air of someone who knew the world, who knew things that we, stuck in Milfield, couldn't even imagine. "Martha is becoming a young lady, isn't she?" commented my father as he cut a piece of pot roast. My mother placed her fork on the plate with a dry clink. "She's at the age to learn greater responsibilities," she replied in that voice that didn't allow contradiction. That same night, while I was washing dishes, I dropped a water glass. It wasn't a big deal, just water on the floor. But for my mother, it was more proof of my incompetence. I saw when she went to the bedroom and returned with the red notebook. She sat at the kitchen table, opened to a new page, and began to write. This time, however, she read aloud as she wrote. "Martha, 13 years old, clumsy, broke a glass, wasted clean water, doesn't pay attention to what she's doing, needs to learn to be more careful." And then, looking at my father and brother watching from the living room, she added, "Next Saturday, we'll resolve this." That week passed as if each day was made of lead. I tried to be perfect, to make no mistakes, but it seemed that the more I tried, the more flaws my mother found. On Friday, I saw when she sat with the open notebook on the porch and showed it to my father and Richard. They talked in low voices and occasionally looked at me. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would jump out of my mouth. On Saturday, after dinner, my mother called me to the living room. My father sat in the only armchair, Richard on the old sofa, and my mother standing like a judge ready to pass sentence. The red notebook was open on the table. "Martha," my mother began, "a young lady who doesn't learn to respect the rules of the house will never be a good woman. This week you failed in your obligations 7 times. And then she read each fault she had noted. The broken glass, a shirt poorly ironed, a roast I overcooked, a response given in a tone considered disrespectful, a delay in fetching water from the well, an incomplete homework assignment, and the worst of all, having been seen talking to Mr. O'Brien's son, who had a reputation as a flirt. For each of these faults, continued my mother, you will receive a punishment. Your father and your brother will ensure you learn the lesson." My father rose from the armchair. "Let's go to her room," he said, in a tone I had never heard before. Richard smiled in a way that made my blood freeze, and my mother, my own mother, just nodded and followed behind them, with the red notebook in her hands, as if it were a perverse Bible. What happened in that room? There are things that are difficult to put into words, my dears. There are pains that, even after so many years, still burn in one's soul. Let's just say that night I learned that the worst punishment doesn't always leave visible marks, that there are wounds no one can see, but that bleed inside. When it was all over, my mother closed the red notebook with a snap that echoed in the silence of the room. "I hope you've learned," she said. "Next week we'll see if you've improved." And so began a cycle that would last for years. Each week, the notations in the notebook. Each Saturday, the punishments. My mother always present, ensuring that each fault was duly punished. Sometimes she herself suggested how the punishment should be applied. Other times she just observed like someone watching an important lesson being taught. I tried everything to escape that cycle. I strove to be perfect, to make no mistakes. But there was always something. A grain of sand in the rice, a drop of water on the floor, a look considered insolent. Anything was reason for a new notation in the red notebook. When I turned 15 in 1973, the county fair brought a small hope. I had been invited to participate in the school choir performance, an invitation that came through Miss Thompson, who saw in me some talent for singing. For a moment, I thought I could have something just for me, something beautiful amid so much darkness. I shared the news with Susan, my faithful friend, the only person who suspected something was wrong in my house, though she never knew the extent of the horror. "Martha, you'll look beautiful singing," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "Who knows? You might meet a boy from another town during the fair." The idea of meeting someone, of perhaps finding a way out of that life, lit a flame of hope in me. But it was enough to get home and mention the invitation to sing at the fair for my mother to take out the red notebook. "Dancing like a harlot," she wrote as she spoke. "Martha wants to show herself off to men, has no shame." That Saturday, the punishment was so severe that I spent 3 days unable to get out of bed. The excuse for the neighbors and for school was that I had fallen down the stairs, and the invitation to sing at the fair was refused with the justification that I was a family girl. At 16, I tried to kill myself for the first time. It was after a particularly brutal Saturday. I took a handful of pills I found in the kitchen cabinet. I just wanted to sleep and never wake up, to escape the nightmare my life had become. But my mother found me convulsing on the bathroom floor and called Mrs. Peterson, the midwife who also cared for the sick in the absence of doctors. I survived, but that attempt only increased my suffering. In the red notebook, my mother wrote, "Martha tried to take her own life, mortal sin, in gratitude to God and to the family that gives her roof and food." The punishment that time was to watch while they burned all my few possessions. The rag dolls from Mrs. Johnson, a diary where I wrote sad poems, a scarf that Susan had given me as a gift. Everything turned to ashes in a fire in the backyard, while I cried without tears, as if my soul was also being burned. At 17, I thought about running away. I even planned everything with Susan, who was now dating a boy from Detroit and talked about moving there. She offered me shelter, said I could go with her, start over far from that house of horrors. For weeks, I saved every penny I could, hiding it under a loose board in my room. I dreamed of freedom every night, imagining what it would be like to breathe without fear. But 3 days before the date we had set to leave, my mother found the money. That night I saw the red notebook being opened to a new page. Martha plans to run away. Theft of money from the house, conspiracy with outsiders, betrayal of the family. What followed was the worst punishment yet. After it, I couldn't walk properly for 2 weeks. Susan left without me, promising to come back for me, but I never saw her again. I learned years later that she died in a car accident on the interstate, taking with her my last hope of escape. At 18, in 1976, something changed inside me. It wasn't sudden, like lightning illuminating the dark sky. It was more like a candle being slowly lit in a dark room. I realized that if I stayed there, I would end up dying, either by my own hand or by the cruelty of those who should protect me. The red notebook continued to be the instrument of my torture. Each week, new notations. Each Saturday, new horrors. But now I observed, noted where my mother kept it, studied her habits, her schedules. I began to understand that the notebook that for so long had been my sentence could perhaps be my salvation. And it was during this period, when I no longer had tears to cry, that I began to plan not just my escape, but something I had never dared to imagine before. My revenge. Not a revenge of blood or violence, I would never be like them, but a revenge of justice, a chance to finally break the chains that bound me to that house, those people, that life of pain. The years between my 18th and 20th birthdays were the darkest of my life. The red notebook continued to dictate my existence week after week, Saturday after Saturday, but something inside me had changed. While on the outside I seemed the same submissive and quiet Martha, inside a storm was forming. My body carried the invisible marks of those years of suffering. At night, even in the rare moments when I was alone and safe in my room, I couldn't sleep. I closed my eyes and saw the red notebook. I heard my mother's voice reading each fault. I felt my father's and brother's hands. Sleep, when it came, was populated by nightmares so real that I woke up screaming, covered in cold sweat. I began having panic attacks. The first happened at the general store while I was buying flour for dinner. Suddenly, without warning, my heart raced. My hands began to shake, and I felt as if all the air had been sucked from my lungs. I fell to my knees right there, between the grocery aisles, breathless and certain I was dying. It was Mr. Thompson, the store owner, who helped me up and took me to the shade of a maple tree. "Breathe slowly, girl," he said, with a kindness I rarely experienced at home. "This will pass. It's just a fright the body takes sometimes." Those attacks became frequent. It was enough to hear a louder noise, see someone who resembled my father or brother, or simply think about the approaching Saturday for my body to collapse. I lived in a constant state of alert, like a cornered animal waiting for the next blow. My stomach also began to rebel. I couldn't eat properly anymore. Food seemed gray in my mouth, tasteless, and I often vomited after meals. I lost so much weight that my ribs showed under my skin, and my hair, once thick and shiny, began to fall out in clumps. At school, where I had once been a good student despite everything, my performance plummeted. I couldn't concentrate in class. The words in the books danced before my eyes without making sense. Miss Wallace, who had replaced my mother when she retired, called me after class one day. "Martha, what's happening? You were one of the best students, and now you can barely answer the simplest questions." I wanted to tell her. I wanted to open my heart and reveal the hell I lived in at home, show the marks no one could see, shout the truth that was stuck in my throat like a thorn. But the words didn't come out. Instead, I mumbled an excuse about not feeling well and promised to try harder. That night, when I returned home, my mother was waiting for me with the red notebook open. "Miss Wallace sought me out," she said, pencil already in hand. "She said you're neglecting your studies, that you're distracted and rebellious in class." Another notation. Another Saturday of horror ahead. It was during this time that I began to hurt myself. Small cuts on my thighs, where no one could see. The physical pain, in some strange way, relieved a bit of the soul's pain. It was as if, for a moment, I could transfer all that internal suffering to something tangible, something I could see and touch, something I could control, unlike everything else in my life. One day, Mrs. Johnson caught me doing this. She had come to bring fresh eggs and found me in the backyard, sitting under the oak tree, with a needle in hand and small drops of blood on my legs. "My child, what is this?" she asked, horrified. I couldn't answer. The tears I thought had dried up long ago returned, and violent sobs shook my fragile body. Mrs. Johnson sat beside me, and without saying anything more, hugged me. It was the first gentle contact I had received in years, and something inside me broke. "There's something wrong in that house," whispered Mrs. Johnson, more to herself than to me. "I always knew there was something strange in the way they treat you." But even Mrs. Johnson, with all her kindness, couldn't imagine the extent of the horror. And I, even in that moment of vulnerability, couldn't tell her. The fear was greater than the pain, greater than the need for help. Fear of what would happen if I spoke, fear of not being believed, fear that the punishments would worsen. At 19, I developed a nervous tic. My right eye blinked uncontrollably when I was anxious, which meant almost all the time. My mother saw this as yet another defect to be noted in the red notebook. "Martha can't even control her own body," she wrote. "She's going crazy like her grandmother." I had never known my maternal grandmother, Judith. I learned later that she had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital in Detroit, where she died alone. Perhaps she too had her own red notebooks, her own demons pursuing her. The isolation made everything worse. After Susan left, I had no true friends. At school, the other young women avoided me. I was strange, too thin, too quiet, with deep, dark circles and that tick in my eye. The boys sometimes made cruel comments when I passed by. "There goes crazy Martha," they would say, laughing. I would lower my head and continue forward, invisible in my pain. Relationships became impossible for me. The mere idea of physical proximity caused me nausea and tremors. Once at the county fair that year, a boy from a neighboring town tried to invite me to dance. He was a kind boy with a sincere smile who knew nothing about me or my story. But when he approached and lightly touched my arm, I screamed as if I had been burned and ran away to hide behind the church. The worst of all was the guilt. Despite knowing somewhere inside me that what was happening wasn't my fault, that I didn't deserve those punishments, years of manipulation had planted in me the seed of doubt. Maybe I really was inadequate, rebellious, ungrateful. Maybe I really deserved all that. This internal battle was constant. Part of me screamed against the injustice, while another accepted the narrative my family had constructed. I was the problem. I was the cause. I was the wrong one. At 20, I realized I was losing the notion of who I was. I looked in the small, cracked mirror in my room and didn't recognize the person looking back at me. Who was Martha? What did she like? What did she dream of? I no longer knew. I had become merely a receptacle of pain, a target for the red notebook, a shadow moving through the days without purpose or hope. Sometimes, when the despair was too great, I allowed myself to imagine a different life. What would it be like to wake up without fear? What would it be like to breathe without that constant pressure in my chest? What would it be like to exist without the red notebook controlling every aspect of my life? These small dreams were dangerous. They fed a hope that could be crushed at any moment, but they were also necessary. Without them, I would have disappeared completely, swallowed by the darkness that surrounded me. It was in one of these moments of dreaming, sitting by the creek while washing clothes, that I had an epiphany. The red notebook had power over me because I believed in it, because I accepted the version of reality it represented. What if I could change that? What if, instead of being the victim of the notebook, I could use it somehow? The idea was just a seed at that moment, small and fragile. But like all well-planted seeds, it began to grow in the fertile soil of my desperation, and with it came a new emotion I hadn't felt in a long time: determination. I was still broken inside. I still had nightmares, panic attacks, nervous tics, and all the other signs of the deep trauma I lived with. But now, there was also something new being born among the cracks of my wounded soul. Something that, as improbable as it seemed at that moment, could one day lead me to freedom. It was in January 1979, a few months after turning 21, that my life changed forever. I remember the exact date, January 15th, Martin Luther King Jr. Day. In Milfield, it was customary on this day to have a small service at church in the morning and then a community gathering in the church square. Even in the most austere houses like ours, it was a day when the rules were relaxed a bit. My mother, always devoted to appearances, made us participate in the service. Dressed in our best clothes, me in a faded blue dress that had been adjusted so many times it hardly looked the same, we walked on Milfield's dirt roads, following the pastor. My father and Richard, now 28, followed a few steps behind us, talking in low voices. After the service, to my surprise, my mother announced that she needed to visit Mrs. Carpenter, an elderly lady who had been her colleague at school and who had been bedridden for months. Even more surprising was when she said, "Martha, you'll stay home. I need you to prepare lunch for when we return." It was rare, very rare indeed, that they would leave me alone in the house. Normally, either I accompanied them or I remained under the surveillance of at least one of them. I tried not to show any reaction, just nodded obediently. But inside, my heart raced with a mixture of fear and hope. As soon as the door closed behind them, I stood paralyzed for a few minutes, not believing the opportunity that had arisen. Then, as if something propelled me, I ran to my parents' bedroom. I knew exactly where to look. The red notebook was kept in a small wooden box at the bottom of the wardrobe, along with important documents and the few pieces of jewelry my mother owned. With trembling hands, I took the box and opened it. There it was, the instrument of my torture for so many years. I hesitated for a moment. Touching that notebook seemed dangerous, like touching something cursed, but determination was stronger than fear. I took it and ran to my room. Sitting on the bed, I opened the red notebook for the first time. The pages were yellowed by time, covered with my mother's small and precise handwriting. Date after date, fault after fault, punishment after punishment. A meticulous documentation of years of abuse written by the hand of the woman who should have protected me. Everything was there, from small incidents like a broken plate to the most serious accusations like immoral behavior or deliberate provocation. And beside each fault, a brief but clear description of the punishment applied, not in explicit terms, but detailed enough that anyone who read would understand the monstrosity of what had happened in that house. Martha, 13 years old, answered back to mother. Punishment applied by father, in bedroom with belt. Martha, 15 years old, looked at boy in church. Richard applied severe correction. Martha, 17 years old, attempted escape, complete punishment, father and brother. Page after page, year after year, a record of horror that made my stomach turn. I knew, of course, what had happened. I had lived through every moment of it, but seeing it all documented, written so coldly, as if it were normal, as if it were just, something inside me broke and recomposed itself at the same time. This wasn't just a notebook of torture, it was a confession, evidence. At that moment, I heard a noise at the front door. I quickly hid the notebook under the mattress and ran to the kitchen, pretending to be busy with lunch. It was Mrs. Johnson coming to bring some flour she had left over from her baking. "Where is everyone?" she asked, placing the package on the table. "They went to visit Mrs. Carpenter," I replied, trying to control the tremor in my voice. "Mrs." Johnson looked at me with those eyes that always seemed to see more than I wanted to show. "You look different today, child. You seem, I don't know, like a bird that saw the cage door open." I hesitated for a moment. Could I trust Mrs. Johnson? She had been the only person who had always shown kindness to me, the only one who seemed to suspect something was wrong, but telling her meant putting her in danger too. My family wouldn't hesitate to hurt anyone who threatened their secret. "Mrs. Johnson," I began, choosing my words carefully, "if you knew about something very bad happening to someone, something that should never happen, what would you do?" She sat slowly at the kitchen table, her eyes never leaving mine. "I would help that person get free from that evil, Martha, no matter what it took." At that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I looked out the window to make sure no one was returning, and then I ran to my room. I came back with the red notebook in my hands and placed it on the table in front of Mrs. Johnson. "Read it." That was all I could say. Mrs. Johnson opened the notebook and began to read. I saw her face change. First confusion, then disbelief, then horror, and finally a fury so intense it transformed that sweet lady into a force of nature. "My God in heaven," she whispered, closing the notebook with trembling hands. "My God in heaven, Martha, this is—" "The truth," I completed, feeling a strange relief for finally having shared my secret with someone. "It's what happens here every Saturday, for years." Mrs. Johnson stood up abruptly, took my hands in hers, and looked me in the eyes with an intensity I had never seen before. "Listen to me, my child. You won't spend another day in this house. You're coming with me now. Take only the essentials. Nothing they'll notice immediately, and bring this notebook. But Mrs. Johnson, they'll look for me. They'll let me handle them. My nephew David is a deputy sheriff in Lakeville. It's not here in Milfield, but he has enough jurisdiction. With this notebook as evidence. She didn't complete the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. At that moment, we heard voices approaching the house. My family was returning. "Tomorrow," said Mrs. Johnson quickly, hiding the notebook in her apron. "Pretend everything is normal. Tomorrow morning, when your mother goes to the store, come to my house as if you were coming to get eggs. Have a small bundle hidden. I'll be waiting." She left through the back door seconds before my mother entered through the front. The rest of that day was a different kind of torture, pretending normalcy when, for the first time in years, I felt a flame of hope. I made lunch, as always. I answered questions with the same submission as always. I kept my eyes down, as always, but inside I was counting the minutes, the hours. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the house, each creak of the floorboards, each breath from the other side of the wall. I was certain that at any moment my plans would be discovered, that my mother would notice the missing notebook, that everything would go wrong. But tomorrow came, and with it the usual routine. My father left early for the factory. Richard was still sleeping after a night of drinking in town, and my mother was preparing to go to the store, as she did every Tuesday. "I'll be back before lunch," she said, adjusting the scarf on her head, "and see that you don't burn the roast today." As soon as she turned the corner, I took the small bundle I had prepared during the night, just a change of clothes, an old photo of my paternal grandmother, the only person in the family who had been kind to me, but who died when I was very young, and the little money I had managed to hide over the years. I left through the back door and walked quickly to Mrs. Johnson's house, being careful not to be seen by neighbors. My heart was beating so hard I thought I might faint before getting there. Mrs. Johnson was waiting as promised, but she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a tall man with a serious appearance, wearing a uniform I immediately recognized. A sheriff's deputy. "Martha, this is my nephew David," Mrs. Johnson introduced. "He read the notebook and came from Lakeville as soon as he knew." David looked at me with a mixture of compassion and professional determination. "Miss Sullivan, what is documented in this notebook is one of the worst cases I've ever seen. Your courage in bringing it to light is admirable." I didn't feel brave. I felt small, scared, uncertain. But there was something in David's firm tone, in Mrs. Johnson's comforting presence, that gave me strength to continue. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. "Now," said David, "we get you out of here. Mrs. Johnson has arranged a place on a bus that leaves for Detroit this afternoon. You'll stay with her cousin Margaret until we resolve the legal situation. After that, you'll be free to start a new life wherever you want." Free? The word sounded strange, almost incomprehensible. How can someone who has lived in a cage all their life understand what it means to fly? "And what about them, my family?" I asked, a part of me still trapped in the fear, the guilt they had taught me to feel. "They will answer for their crimes," said David, his voice now hard as stone. "The notebook is sufficient evidence to start a process, and once we begin to investigate, I'm sure we'll find more proof, perhaps even other victims." Other victims? I had never thought of that before, but it made sense. If they were capable of doing what they did to me, their own daughter and sister, what else might they be capable of? That afternoon, with just the clothes on my back and my small bundle, I boarded a bus bound for Detroit. Mrs. Johnson hugged me tightly before I got on board. "You deserve a good life, my child," she said, tears running down her wrinkled face. "A life of love, not fear. Go and don't look back." Standing on the bus, I watched Milfield diminish in the distance, the houses, the streets, the church, everything being left behind. Somewhere in that town, my mother would be returning from the store, discovering my absence. Somewhere the nightmare continued, but I was heading down the highway away from it, toward an uncertain future, but my own. The red notebook traveled with me now, no longer as an instrument of torture, but as evidence, a weapon, a key to my liberation. I had used against them the very instrument they had used to control me for so many years. That's how, at 21, I left behind not just Milfield, but an entire life of pain. That's how I took the first step in the long journey that brought me here, to this porch in Cedar Springs, to this woman who now shares her story with you. The first months in Detroit were like learning to breathe again. Margaret's house, Mrs. Johnson's cousin, was in a simple neighborhood called Corktown, near the river. It was a small house, but airy, with windows that let in the sunlight, something that had never been allowed in the dark house where I grew up. Margaret was a woman in her 50s, a widow like Mrs. Johnson, with a face marked by time, but gentle eyes. She worked as a seamstress in a small atelier in the city center, and from the first day, she treated me not as a victim to be pitied, but as someone who deserved a chance to start over. "Here you are safe," were her first words to me. "What happened before is left behind. Now it's time to look forward." But looking forward wasn't so simple. The nightmares continued, now even more vivid. I woke up screaming almost every night, my body soaked in sweat, certain that my father and brother were there in the room, ready for punishment. Margaret would come, sit on the edge of the bed, and simply hold my hand until I calmed down enough to go back to sleep. During the day, the panic attacks also persisted. It was enough to see a man who remotely resembled my father or hear a more severe tone of voice for my entire body to collapse. Walking the streets of Detroit, so different from the streets of Milfield, I felt constantly exposed, vulnerable, as if at any moment they would find me and drag me back to that red notebook. The notebook itself was now in the hands of the authorities. Deputy David kept regular contact, informing me about the progress of the case. My parents and Richard had been arrested a week after my escape, when the evidence from the notebook was corroborated by testimonies from neighbors who, now that the secret was exposed, admitted having suspected something for years. "No one will be able to get near you," David assured me on the few occasions we met. "They'll be behind bars for a long time." But physical freedom didn't mean emotional freedom. I still carried the invisible chains of trauma, still moved through the world as if I were waiting for the next blow. It was Margaret who suggested I seek help. "I know a woman, a healer named Rosalie," she said one day, while sewing a dress in the small room that served as her workshop. "She helps people who carry wounds that can't be seen." Reluctantly, I agreed to meet Rosalie. She lived in a simple house in the Mexican town neighborhood, surrounded by a garden where she cultivated medicinal herbs of all kinds. She was a black woman with white hair, with hands calloused by work and eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. "You carry a lot of pain, child," was the first thing she said to me, without my having spoken a single word. Old pain that has entered the bones like dampness in an old house. Rosalie didn't ask me to tell my story. Instead, she taught me to breathe. Something so basic that I had never really learned to do correctly. Breathe deeply, hold, release slowly, like the river that flows unhurriedly, she would say, while preparing herbal teas I had never seen before. Breathing is the first thing we do when we're born, and the last when we depart. In between, we forget how important it is. I began to visit Rosalie 3 times a week. Each visit was a small step out of the darkness. She taught me about plants and their properties: chamomile to calm, valerian for nightmares, passion flower for anxiety. Gradually, I found myself interested in something for the first time in years. "You have a gift for this," she commented one day, seeing me identify different herbs just by smell. "The plants speak to you, and you listen." At home, Margaret also did her part in my healing process. With infinite patience, she taught me to sew. First simple stitches, then more complex techniques. There was something deeply therapeutic about creating something with my hands, about transforming a piece of fabric into something beautiful and useful. Each stitch is like a day, Margaret would say. Alone it doesn't seem like much, but when you put them all together, it becomes an entire life. It was also Margaret who encouraged me to study. At 21, I had only incomplete middle school education. My education had been interrupted by the horrors at home. With her help, I enrolled in a night course to complete my studies. It was difficult at first. The words danced before my eyes, the numbers got jumbled, and being in a room full of strangers triggered panic attacks. But gradually, day by day, stitch by stitch, I built a new version of myself. A Martha who could look people in the eye, who could learn, who could even smile from time to time. At the end of 1980, I received the news that my parents and Richard had been convicted. The trial had been quick, thanks to the irrefutable evidence of the Red Notebook and the testimonies that emerged. They would serve many years in prison. "It's the end," said David, who had come personally to Detroit to give me the news. "Now you can really move forward." Part of me expected to feel joy, revenge, some kind of satisfaction, but what I felt was something more complex. A silent relief, like someone finally setting down a weight they had carried for too long. It was around this time that I met Harold. He worked as a delivery man for some downtown stores and always stopped at Margaret's workshop to drop off fabrics and materials. He was a calm man of few words but gentle gestures. When he smiled, small wrinkles formed around his eyes, like rays of sunshine. At first I could barely look at him. Any man still caused me a visceral, instinctive fear, but Harold had a patience that seemed infinite. He never came too close, never spoke loudly, never made sudden movements. It was as if somehow he understood without my needing to explain. "Good morning, Miss Martha," he would say every time, with a respect I had never received from a man before. And then he would leave a small gift, a fruit, a flower picked on the way, a colorful piece of fabric he had found and thought Margaret could use. It was months of good morning and small gifts before I could really talk to him, and more months still until I agreed to walk with him to Eastern Market, always accompanied by Margaret, of course. Harold was 25, 5 years older than me, and was from a small town near Grand Rapids. He had come to Detroit seeking work after his father died, leaving his mother and 3 younger sisters for him to support. He sent almost his entire salary to them, keeping just enough for his rented room and simple food. "One day, I want to have my own business," he told me during one of our walks. "A small store, maybe something I can leave for my family." Family. The word still caused a tightness in my chest, memories I preferred to forget. But the way Harold talked about family, with affection, with responsibility, with love, was so different from what I had known that it almost seemed like a completely different concept. In 1982, 2 years after we met, Harold asked me to marry him. It was a simple proposal, without grand gestures, just his sincere words and a small silver ring he had saved months to buy. "I know you carry pains that may never completely heal," he said, holding my hands with a delicacy that still moved me. "I don't promise to take away these pains, but I promise never, ever to add any more." I married Harold in a small ceremony in Margaret's backyard. Only she, Rosalie, some friends from the workshop, and 2 of Harold's friends were present. There was nothing grandiose or luxurious, but there was something I had never experienced before: peace. Our first home was a small rented room in the same neighborhood as Margaret. Harold continued as a delivery man, and I began to work with Rosalie, helping to prepare her natural remedies and learning more and more about the healing power of plants. In the beginning, the intimacy of marriage was an immense challenge for me. Harold knew about my past, not all the details, but enough to understand my fears. With a patience that seemed to come from another world, he waited until I was ready, never demanding, never forcing. "We have all the time in the world," he would say, when I trembled at the slightest touch, when nightmares woke me in the middle of the night, when panic attacks left me paralyzed. In 1983, a year after our marriage, I discovered I was pregnant. The initial fear was overwhelming. How could I, with all my wounds, be a mother? What right did I have to bring a child into the world when I myself was still so broken? "You're not broken," said Rosalie when I shared my fears with her. "You're healing, and this child will grow up seeing your scars transform into strength." My first child, Joseph, was born in February 1984. Holding him in my arms for the first time was like holding a miracle, something so pure, so innocent, so full of possibilities. I swore at that moment that he would never know the kind of pain I knew, that his childhood would be as different from mine as day is from night. In 1986, we had our daughter, Emma, named in honor of the teacher who once tried to give me a chance to sing at the fair. And in 1990, our youngest, Thomas, in honor of the store owner who helped me during my first panic attack in Milfield. With 3 small children, our life was busy, but happy. Harold had managed to save enough money to open a small store as he dreamed. It didn't bring much profit, but it was enough to maintain us. I continued working with Rosalie and gradually began to see some people on my own, preparing home remedies for simple problems, teas for headaches, poultices for injuries, syrups for coughs. Our house now was larger, still in the same neighborhood, but with a small backyard where I cultivated my own medicinal herbs. The children grew up strong and healthy, studied at the local school, and filled the house with laughter and play, sounds I had never heard in the house of my childhood. Not everything was perfect, of course. The traumas of the past still appeared from time to time. There were days when I couldn't get out of bed, consumed by a deep sadness that seemed to have no end. There were nights when the nightmares returned with such force that I woke up screaming, frightening the children. There were moments when an innocent gesture from Harold, raising his hand to adjust a curtain, speaking a little louder to the boys, sent me back to that room in Milfield, those Saturdays of horror. But unlike before, now I wasn't alone in these moments. I had Harold, who never lost patience, who learned to recognize the signs and knew when to give me space or when to simply sit beside me in silence. I had my children who, even without completely understanding what was happening, knew to offer a hug, a drawing, a smile that illuminated the shadows. I had Rosalie, who continued teaching me that healing isn't a destination, but a daily journey. In 1995, we lost Margaret to a cancer that took her in a few months. It was a different pain from anything I had ever felt. Not the horror of abuse, but the clean, honest sadness of losing someone you love. We cried together as a family and also learned that the pain of grief, unlike the pain of trauma, transforms over time into sweet memories, into gratitude for having known someone so special. The years passed, our children growing. Joseph became interested in mechanics and started working in an auto repair shop. Emma, my intelligent girl, dreamed of being a teacher, not like my mother had been, but like that Miss Thompson from Milfield, inspiring and supporting her students. Thomas, the youngest, showed talent for business from an early age, helping his father in the store and already making plans to expand the business. In 2005, Harold received an offer to open a larger store in Cedar Springs. The town was growing, especially with the annual Heritage Festival that attracted tourists from all over Michigan. After much family discussion, we decided to accept. Joseph, already 21, chose to stay in Detroit, where he had his work and his girlfriend. But Emma, at 19, and Thomas, at 15, came with us on this new adventure. And so, at 47, I found myself once again boarding a bus along the highway, leaving behind one life to start another. But this time, unlike that frightened girl of 21 fleeing Milfield, I wasn't alone. I was surrounded by a family I had built with love, carrying not just scars, but also achievements, happy memories, and the certainty that, no matter how difficult life had been, I had found my way to the light. Here in Cedar Springs, where I've lived for almost 20 years, I finally found a place I can call home. Our move in 2005 was a fresh start. I was no longer that frightened young woman fleeing Milfield, nor even the recovering woman from Detroit. At 47, I arrived on this small town in the middle of Michigan as a woman who, despite the scars, had learned to live fully. Harold and I bought this little blue house where I am now, with a view of the creek. In the beginning, it was just a simple structure, but over the years we improved it, painting, adding details that made it ours. The backyard, which was once just bare earth, I transformed into a small paradise of medicinal herbs and flowers. Here, I cultivate chamomile, mint, lavender, rosemary, sage, thyme, plants that nature offers us with such generosity. Harold opened his larger store as he dreamed, near the town center. Jenkins General Store, said the wooden sign he had carved with such pride. He sold a little bit of everything: food, household items, fishing gear, souvenirs for tourists who came for the Heritage Festival. The business prospered, not to the point of making us rich, but enough for us to live with dignity and comfort. Emma, our daughter, completed her studies and became a teacher at the local school here. She has that gift for teaching, that infinite patience with children. She married William, a local musician who plays in the community band, and gave me 2 wonderful grandchildren, Judith, who is now 15, and Oliver, 12. They live a few blocks from here, and almost every day come to visit me after school. Thomas, my youngest, followed in his father's footsteps in commerce. He worked with Harold in the store from the beginning and eventually opened his own craft shop aimed at tourists. He married Leah, a girl from here in Cedar Springs, and I have 3 more grandchildren from them, the twins Grace and David, 10, and little Margaret, only 5. As you can see, I made sure to honor in the new generations those who helped me survive and rebuild my life. Joseph, my firstborn, remained in Detroit for a few years, but in 2010 decided to join us in Cedar Springs. He brought with him his wife Catherine and my first granddaughter Emily, who is now 18 and studying nursing in Grand Rapids. Joseph opened a boat repair shop here in town, an essential service in this region, where the lakes are our main recreation. Life followed its peaceful course until 2017, when Harold fell ill. It was a fulminant cancer, the kind that when you discover it, it's already spread throughout the body. In just 3 months, I watched my companion of so many years waste away before my eyes. But even in this difficult moment, Harold maintained his dignity, his gentleness. He never complained about the pain, never questioned why this was happening to him, just held my hand and said, "Martha, you are the best thing that happened in my life. Look what we built together." He passed away on an April afternoon, quietly, as he always was, while I held his hand and our children were around the bed. The pain of loss was immense, but different, as I had already learned with Margaret's passing. It was a clean, honest pain, without the poison of trauma. It was the pain of losing someone loved, not the pain of having been betrayed by those who should protect you. After Harold's death, I thought I would feel lost again. After all, he had been my safe harbor for 35 years, but I discovered a strength in me that I didn't even know existed. The children wanted me to live with one of them, concerned that I would be alone, but I felt I needed to maintain my own space, my independence. It was during this period that I began to sell my tinctures and teas at the Cedar Springs Farmers Market. In the beginning, it was just a way to keep myself occupied, to have a purpose to wake up for each morning. With time, it became not just a source of income, but a way to help people with the knowledge I had acquired throughout life. 3 times a week, I set up my small stand at the market. I have faithful customers who come from different parts of town, some even from distant rural areas, seeking my natural remedies. "Miss Martha," they call me, with a respect that still moves me. "Do you have something good for back pain?" "Miss Martha, my boy has a fever. What do you recommend?" And so I live between my house, my herb garden, my stand at the market, and the constant visits from my children and grandchildren. It's a simple life, but full. A life that, during so many years of suffering in Milfield, I didn't even dare to dream I could have. Of course, not everything is perfect. There are days when the memories return like dark clouds on the horizon. There are nights when I still wake up frightened, my heart racing, feeling the ghost of that red notebook. The tick in my eye, which never completely disappeared, returns when I'm particularly anxious. And there are certain sounds, certain smells, certain words that can, without warning, momentarily transport me back to that room in Milfield. But the difference is that now I know these moments pass. I know they are just echoes of a past that can no longer reach me. I've learned to breathe deeply, as Rosalie taught me so many years ago, to feel the firm ground beneath my feet, to look around and recognize that I am safe, that I am home. My grandchildren are my greatest joy. With them, I can live the childhood I never had. Games, laughter, spontaneous hugs, stories told in the rocking chair on the porch on warm afternoons. Judith, the oldest, already shows interest in medicinal plants and often helps me in the garden, learning the names and properties of each herb. "Grandma, what is this one for?" she asks, her eyes shining with curiosity, and my heart fills with joy to pass this knowledge forward, to create a chain of healing that goes beyond me. When I look back at the long road that brought me here, I feel a mixture of sadness for what I suffered and gratitude for what I overcame. I can't say I've completely forgiven my parents and my brother. There are wounds that are too deep for that, but I've freed myself from the hatred that could have consumed me. I learned that the best revenge against those who tried to destroy my soul was to build a beautiful life, a loving family, a home where fear has no place. I learned years later that my father died in prison in 1995. My mother was released in 2001, already elderly and sick, and died a few months later, alone in a nursing home in Detroit. Richard served his sentence and, from what I heard, lives somewhere in northern Michigan. I never had contact with him again, nor do I wish to. The red notebook, the one that for so many years dictated my suffering and then became my liberation, I don't know where it is today, probably in some dusty archive of the judicial system. But it doesn't matter. Its function in my life has already been fulfilled. Now I have other notebooks, one where I note the recipes for my tinctures, another where I write poetry on sleepless nights, and a third where I record the stories of my family to one day leave to my grandchildren. Here in Cedar Springs at 67, I am known not as the abused girl from Milfield, not as the traumatized woman from Detroit, but as Miss Martha, the herb lady, who has a gentle smile and words of comfort for those who need them. It's an identity I built with my own hands, a name I carry with pride. And so I live day by day, cultivating my plants, preparing my remedies, hugging my grandchildren, observing the creek that continues its eternal course. I've learned that life, like that creek, doesn't stop because of stones in the path. It just finds new routes, new flows, and continues forward, carrying with it both the clear and the murky waters, transforming everything into part of the same journey. My dear ones who have accompanied me to this point, if there's one thing I've learned in this long journey, it's that our deepest wounds can transform into sources of strength. That red notebook that for so long was the instrument of my torture ended up becoming the key to my liberation. And that's the greatest lesson I can leave for you. No pain, no matter how terrible, needs to define who we are forever. For those going through situations of abuse, I want to say with all the strength of my heart, it's not your fault. It never was. Regardless of what they tell you, regardless of how they try to justify what they do, the fault lies with the abuser, never with the victim. No one has the right to hurt you. No one has the right to use your body, your mind, or your soul against your will. And most importantly, you are not alone. For a long time, I thought no one could help me, that I was condemned to that life of horror. But there were people like Mrs. Johnson, like David, like Margaret, like Rosalie, people who extended their hand when I needed it most. They exist, my dear one. Sometimes they are closer than we imagine, just waiting for us to have the courage to ask for help. Today, there are resources we didn't have in my time. Call 911 to report abuse, contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799 7233. Reach out to Child Protective Services in your city, protection NGOs, specialized police units. And if the first person you talk to doesn't believe you, don't give up. Talk to another and another until you find someone who listens. Keeping this kind of secret corrodes the soul like rust corrodes metal. It slowly consumes you, taking away your strength, your will to live. Breaking the silence is the first step toward healing. That's what happened when I showed the red notebook to Mrs. Johnson. That moment changed everything. It was like opening a window in a dark, stuffy room. Recovery isn't a straight or quick path. There are good days and bad days. There are moments when we feel we're advancing and others when it seems we've gone back to the beginning. This is normal. It's part of the process. As Rosalie used to say, healing is like the tide. It goes in and out, but each time it reaches a little further up the beach. I also learned that we are stronger than we imagine. When I fled Milfield at 21, I was just a broken girl, without hope, without dreams. Look where I've come. Mother of 3 wonderful children, grandmother of 6 grandchildren who are the light of my life, respected in my community, owner of my own livelihood. If someone had told me at that time that this life would be possible, I wouldn't have believed it. That's why I say to you who are suffering now, there is a future waiting for you beyond this pain, a future that perhaps you can't imagine yet, but it's there, like the sun behind storm clouds. Hold on to that hope in the most difficult moments. Use it as a compass when you feel you're losing your way. And for you who know someone who may be living in situations of abuse, a neighbor, a family member, a school or work colleague, don't close your eyes. Often, a kind word, an attentive ear, a gesture of support can be what that person needs to find courage. Mrs. Johnson saved my life with her vigilant kindness. You can do the same for someone. Violence thrives in silence. It feeds on our fear, our shame, our isolation. When we speak up, when we report, when we unite to protect the vulnerable, we take power away from abusers. We transform our individual pain into collective strength. Today, at 67, I look back and see that I survived, not just for myself, but to be able to be here telling my story, perhaps helping someone who is going through what I went through. Our scars are proof that we were stronger than what tried to destroy us. I thank each one of you who listened to me up to this point, who shared this difficult but necessary journey with me. Your attention, your respect for my story means more than you can imagine. It means that I am no longer alone with my memories, that they now exist in you as well and perhaps can illuminate the path of other people. My dear ones, especially those of you who have felt the horror of abuse firsthand, I need you to listen to me carefully now. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications immediately. This isn't just any request, it's a request from someone who knows that each shared story can be a lifeline for someone who is drowning in silence. When you subscribe, you're helping these stories reach further, to reach those who need to hear that it's possible to survive and rebuild life after abuse. And do you know someone who lives with their head down, who trembles when a door slams, who seems to have constant fear of their own shadow? Share this video with that person right now. They may be living their own silent hell, just waiting for a sign that they're not alone, that there is a way out. Your share can literally save a life, just as Mrs. Johnson saved mine when she realized something was wrong. And please, leave in the comments, "I believe you and I am here." These simple words may be exactly what someone needs to read today to find the courage to ask for help, to take the first step out of the cycle of abuse. Do it now. Don't wait even one more minute. Every second can make a difference for someone who is suffering at this very moment. Because, my dear ones, what I never told anyone until today is that, after my escape, 2 other girls from the Milfield area found the courage to report their own abusers. The Red Notebook didn't just save me. It created a small wave of liberation that continues to spread to this day like circles in water,